The morning sun rose softly over the rolling hills of Arkansas, painting the Duggar family home in shades of gold. The house stood quiet, wrapped in a fragile calm, the kind that comes just before life changes forever. Birds chirped outside, and the faint hum of the coffee machine filled the kitchen. Inside, the familiar rhythm of the Duggar household was slowly waking up. Jim Bob Duggar, always the first to rise, stood by the window with a half-finished cup of coffee in his hand. He looked out toward the driveway, lost in thought. His face carried the lines of a man who had seen both fortune and failure, but this morning, his heart felt unusually light. He was taking Josie to school, just father and daughter, a quiet morning drive together. Upstairs, the youngest Duggar child, Josie, was already ready. Her energy filled the entire room. She was wearing her favorite sky blue dress, the one with the small white flowers that danced around the hem when she moved. Her hair, tied neatly in 2 braids by Michelle, swayed as she hopped around looking for her little pink backpack. Michelle smiled faintly as she watched her daughter rush down the stairs, her laughter echoing through the house like a melody. It was one of those mornings that felt too perfect, the kind that makes you forget how fragile life can be. Jim Bob opened the car door, and Josie climbed in, humming a tune she had made up the night before. The seatbelt clicked, the engine started, and they pulled out of the driveway. The air outside was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and pine. The radio played softly, a familiar country song. Jim Bob tapped his fingers on the steering wheel in rhythm, occasionally glancing at Josie through the rearview mirror. Her reflection smiled back, innocent and full of light. She was talking about her school presentation, how she wanted to make her teacher proud. Her voice, sweet and full of life, filled the car like sunshine through glass. The road ahead stretched endlessly, a clean ribbon of asphalt cutting through quiet farmland. Morning mist hung low over the fields, and everything seemed peaceful, almost sacred. For a moment, Jim Bob felt thankful. He thought about how far his family had come, the struggles they had faced, the public eyes always watching. Yet here, on this road, none of that mattered. It was just him and his daughter, in their own small world. But fate often strikes in silence. At an intersection near the edge of town, a large truck suddenly appeared, speeding, out of control. The driver, distracted for only a second, missed the red light. The sound of screeching tires tore through the air. Jim Bob Endersquo's eyes widened. He gripped the wheel, tried to swerve, but there was no time. The crash came like thunder. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. The car spun off the road, rolling into a shallow ditch. Then, silence. Smoke rose slowly from the wreckage. The radio had stopped. The world had stopped. Inside the mangled car, Jim Bob's breath came shallow and uneven. Blood trickled down his forehead. His hands trembled as he tried to move. Pain shot through his arm, but none of it mattered, because all he could see was Josie. Her small body lay still beside him, the blue dress torn, her hair tangled with shards of glass. The little pink backpack had fallen to the floorboard, one strap hanging loose. Jim Bob tried to speak her name, but the words wouldn't come out. His voice broke into silence. Tears blurred his vision as he reached for her hand, still warm but lifeless. The distant sound of sirens began to rise, faint at first, then closer. The sky that had been bright only moments ago was now covered in dark clouds. Jim Bob closed his eyes. He didn't need to be told. He already knew. His little girl was gone, and in that single moment, his entire world shattered into pieces. The blaring sound of ambulance sirens sliced through the still morning air. Paramedics rushed toward the wreckage, their voices urgent, their footsteps heavy. The once peaceful highway now stood as a graveyard of twisted metal and broken glass. Jim Bob lay conscious but fading, the world around him spinning in and out of focus. He could hear the faint murmurs, child, unresponsive, words that tore through his heart long before his mind could understand. His body ached, but his soul felt hollow. They lifted him onto a stretcher, his hand weakly reaching out, searching for Josie. But she was already covered with a white sheet, small and still, her world forever silent. The ambulance roared toward the hospital, its lights flashing against the pale morning sky. Inside, Jim Bob's eyes fluttered open and closed. He whispered something no one could hear. A prayer, maybe. Or just her name. Hours passed. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. In the emergency room, doctors moved quickly, their faces grim. Jim Bob was treated for minor injuries, a fractured rib, a deep cut on his forehead, but his mind was elsewhere. When Michelle Duggar arrived, her face was pale as paper. The moment her eyes met the doctor's, she knew. There are no words that prepare a mother for such news. The hallway echoed with her sobs, the kind of sound that cuts through walls and hearts alike. Family members began to gather one by one, Jana, Jessa, Joanna, and the rest. The hospital corridors filled with familiar faces now drained of color and light. No one spoke. No one dared. Only the sound of quiet weeping and the whisper of prayers broke the silence. In a small private room, Josie's body lay peacefully on a narrow bed. Her face looked untouched, like she was only sleeping. A soft white blanket covered her. A small teddy bear rested beside her pillow, placed there by one of her sisters, hands trembling. Jim Bob sat by her side, his hand wrapped gently around her little fingers. He didn't cry. Not at first. He just stared, lost somewhere between disbelief and despair. Memories flooded his mind, her first words, her laughter, the way she would tug on his arm to get attention. He remembered promising to protect her always. And now, he couldn't even protect her from fate. Michelle stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder. For the first time in many years, Jim Bob, the strong, unshakable father figure, broke down completely. His cries were low at first, then uncontrollable. The camera would linger there, on the shaking of his shoulders, the quiet storm of grief that filled the room. Outside, the press had already gathered. News vans lined the parking lot. Reporters whispered. Cameras clicked. The world was about to know. The Duggar family had lost their youngest daughter. But inside that hospital room, time stood still. For Jim Bob and Michelle, fame, faith, and everything else faded into nothingness. There was only silence. Only the unbearable weight of goodbye. Rain began to fall the morning of the funeral. Not heavy, not loud, just a gentle, endless drizzle that seemed to mourn with them. The Duggar family home, once filled with laughter and noise, stood in silence. Curtains were drawn, lights dimmed, and the air was thick with grief. The front yard, once a playground for the children, was now lined with cars. Friends, relatives, and members of the community came quietly, umbrellas in hand, heads bowed. No one knew what to say. What words could possibly fit into a moment like this? Inside the small white chapel at the edge of town, a tiny casket rested near the altar, pale wood, adorned with soft pink lilies and white roses. The name Josie Brooklyn Duggar was engraved in gold letters. The room was filled, yet it felt empty. The walls, the pews, even the light itself seemed to hold their breath. Michelle sat in the front row, clutching a small piece of Josie's hair ribbon in her hand. Her eyes were red, her lips trembling from holding back screams that never came. Beside her, Jim Bob sat motionless. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, staring at nothing, at everything, at the unbearable truth in front of him. One by one, family members walked to the front. Jana placed a drawing Josie had made, a picture of the family, smiling under a bright sun. Jessa laid down Josie's favorite doll. Joanna whispered a prayer under her breath, her tears soaking into the wooden floor. A faint piano played in the background, a hymn about heaven and home. But the sound of Michelle's soft sobs rose above the music, the kind of sound that echoes in the soul and never leaves. The camera would move slowly through the crowd, showing familiar faces, all broken in different ways. Some cried openly. Some just stared blankly, unable to process the loss. Outside, reporters stood quietly for once, the usual noise of cameras replaced by the hum of rain. As the service ended, Jim Bob stood, his body shaking as he approached the casket. He placed his trembling hand on the lid, and for a moment, he just stayed there, frozen in silence. The flashbacks begin. Josie laughing in the garden. Josie running into his arms. Josie blowing out birthday candles, her cheeks glowing red from excitement. Each memory hits harder than the last. Then, the sound fades. Only the heartbeat remains, slow, heavy, painful. As the casket was lowered into the ground, the rain turned into a downpour. Umbrellas trembled under the weight of water. Michelle collapsed into Jim Bob's arms, her cries swallowed by the storm. The camera pulls back slowly, showing the entire family huddled together in the rain, a portrait of love and loss. And above them, the gray clouds seem endless, as if heaven itself refuses to open. That night, the Duggar house was silent again. Josie's room remained untouched, her shoes by the bed, her drawings taped to the wall, her stuffed bear sitting where she left it. The soft glow of a night light flickered in the corner, as if waiting for her to come back. Jim Bob stood in the doorway for a long time, unable to step inside. He whispered something under his breath, a promise, maybe, before turning off the light. And once the room went dark, the entire house seemed to follow. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slipped quietly into months. The Duggar home, once overflowing with laughter, music, and voices, now carried only echoes. The walls seemed to breathe sadness. Every room whispered her name. Josie's pictures still hung on the refrigerator door, drawings of stick figures and flowers, a reminder of innocence now gone. Her school shoes remained under the hall bench, untouched, as if waiting for small feet that would never return. Michelle tried to keep the family together, preparing meals, organizing routines, forcing smiles that never reached her eyes. But grief has its own rhythm. It seeps into every corner of a home, turning even sunlight into shadow. Jim Bob stopped leading family prayers. He barely spoke. He would sit in the living room for hours, staring at the empty armchair where Josie used to curl up with her blanket. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Michelle would wake to find him standing outside by the driveway, staring at the spot where he last saw her alive. The hum of crickets filled the silence, and his breath came out in trembling whispers. He blamed himself. No one told him to, but he did. He replayed the crash in his mind endlessly. The moment the truck appeared, the sound of screeching tires, the flash of Josie's terrified eyes. Each night, the scene returned like a ghost. Each morning, he woke up hoping it was just a dream. The family's public image began to fade. Television contracts were quietly withdrawn. Interviews were cancelled. Fans wrote letters filled with condolences, but also judgment. Some called it God's test. Others whispered it was a punishment. But Jim Bob didn't care anymore. Fame, fortune, followers, they all meant nothing now. One afternoon, he drove to the small hill behind their property, the one Josie loved. He parked the car and sat there, watching the wind move through the tall grass. He could almost hear her laughter in the breeze. He remembered how she would run barefoot across the hill, arms open wide, shouting to the sky that she wanted to fly. Now, in the quiet, those words haunted him. Michelle found him there hours later, sitting on the ground, holding Josie's pink hair ribbon in his hand. His eyes were red but calm, the kind of calm that comes when pain runs too deep for tears. That night, the family gathered around the dinner table. For the first time in months, Jim Bob spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper. He talked about forgiveness, not from others, but from himself. About faith, not the kind you preach on camera, but the kind you hold on to when everything else is gone. As he spoke, the family held hands. There were tears, yes, but there was also silence, peace, and something fragile beginning to heal. Later that evening, Jim Bob walked into Josie's room. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Her drawings were still taped to the wall. He knelt beside her bed, touched her pillow, and for the first time, closed his eyes without fear of remembering. Outside, The sky was clear again. The stars were bright, brighter than they had been since that morning. And in that stillness, he finally whispered goodbye. Winter passed quietly over the hills of Arkansas. Snow blanketed the Duggar property, soft and silent, muting every sound except the whisper of wind through the trees. The once busy home stood like a resting heart, still, but not lifeless. Inside, the walls still carried memories, framed photographs, drawings, the faint scent of childhood that lingered no matter how much time passed. Josie's room had become a sacred place. Michelle kept it just as it was, dusted and neat, as if her daughter might walk through the door any moment. Jim Bob entered that room less often now, not because he'd forgotten, but because the pain had become gentler. It no longer burned, it ached quietly, like an old wound healing beneath the surface. The family had begun gathering again for nightly prayers. The circle around the table felt smaller, but stronger. Each prayer now carried Josie's name, whispered softly at the end, like a secret they all shared with heaven. Michelle often sat by the window at dawn, watching the sun rise over the trees. Every morning looked a little brighter than the last. One evening, she found a small letter inside one of Josie's old notebooks. The paper was crumpled, the handwriting uneven, simple, childish. It read, "I love my family. I love Jesus. I don't ever want to leave. But if I do, I will watch you from the clouds." Michelle pressed the letter to her heart and wept, not from despair this time, but from a strange kind of peace. She walked downstairs and showed it to Jim Bob. He read it silently, his hands trembling. For the first time in months, a small smile appeared on his face. That night, he sat on the porch, watching the stars. The air was cold, crisp, alive. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear laughter, faint, familiar, almost like Josie's. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe not. He realized something profound. Josie hadn't really left. She was everywhere. In the way the house creaked at night. In the laughter of her brothers and sisters. In the morning sunlight that slipped through the curtains, warm and forgiving. Spring came. The garden, which had withered through winter, began to bloom again. Michelle planted lilies, Josie's favorite, near the small wooden cross they'd placed in the backyard. Every petal that opened felt like a whisper of rebirth. The family began to film again, not for fame or television, but for themselves. Simple home videos, birthdays, prayers, dinners, laughter. Life as it was meant to be. And in every shot, there was always a moment of silence, a space left for Josie. One Sunday, Jim Bob gathered everyone in the living room. The sunlight poured in through the windows, bright and pure. He stood there quietly, holding Josie's small pink hair ribbon. He said nothing for a long time. Then, slowly, he placed it in a glass frame and set it above the fireplace. A single ribbon, soft, fragile, eternal. He looked at his family, his wife, his children, and for the first time since that terrible day, he smiled. Not the smile of denial, not the one people wear for the camera, but a real, human smile, the kind that comes when pain finally learns to live beside love. The camera would pan slowly around the room. Michelle's teary eyes, Jana's quiet strength, the children holding hands. Then it would drift toward the window, where the wind gently moved the curtains. Through that window, the sunlight would spill across Josie's framed picture, her bright eyes, her endless smile frozen in time. The screen would fade to white. But just before the credits, one final scene would appear. A field of green under a golden sunset. Josie's laughter echoes faintly in the wind. The sound of a little girl running barefoot through the grass, her dress fluttering, her voice calling out into the light. And then, silence. Only the words appear on the screen. In loving memory of Josie Brooklyn Duggar. The light that never truly left. The music swells, soft piano, gentle strings, and the credits roll over shots of the blooming garden, the family smiling again, and the sky slowly turning from gold to blue. Because grief never truly ends. It only changes shape. And love, once given, never dies.